Hey, welcome to 98% Podcast. We hear real stories from real people, and I'm here with Henry Wynd. Tell us a little about yourself, Henry.
What's up, brother? Good to see you, first of all. Really good to see you. What do you need to know about me? I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. Born and raised, moved a bunch as a kid. Went to college here, double majored in psychology and sociology, played soccer in college. Then after college, spent a couple of years in Charlotte, North Carolina. Spent a lot of really good time there. Some of my favorite memories I've had in my life were in Charlotte, North Carolina. Then moved to Colorado for a little bit, Breckenridge, which was a dream of mine since I was a little kid, before finding my way back to St. Louis and been back here for a couple of years. Lifelong soccer fan. It's like, I mean, obviously you can, if you're watching this, you can see this, behind me. If you're listening to it, I have literally so much soccer memorabilia, like behind me, from soccer cleats to jerseys to I'm wearing a soccer jersey at the moment. It's one of my favorite things. Love people. It's where I spend a lot of my free time, and my paid time is just in the people business. Dog dad, proud dad of two. Got engaged back in January. Life's good. That I feel like is a little bit of what you need to know about me.
I love that. Okay, so how do you know me?
We worked at Nike together, actually. I met you, I think, day two of my employment at Nike. Um, which was fantastic. At the time, you were training people like me, and you did my training, and that's how we met. That's how we met several months back. What was that? September 2023 is when I think that was. So I would say that's
Yeah.
how we know each other. Yeah.
Was it that? Was it September? Was it earlier? Could it have
It
been
was. I
earlier?
started the first week of September, so it had
Okay,
to
so
have
then
been
no, had to
September.
have been. I just remember
Yeah.
it being really hot outside when we went to that ARMI event.
Yeah, so hot. It's St. Louis for you. Like, that's the thing. Like, we
Uh,
get all four seasons in all four seasons to like the nth degree. Like right now it's not too bad, but I mean earlier last week it was like 97 degrees with about 87% humidity. And then a couple months back it was, 0 degrees with snow on the ground, and you get everything.
yeah, it's insane.
Yeah.
So what was really cool, what I really liked is it's funny because we met, yeah, day two, we did training and stuff, but I remember us like we did some icebreaker questions. I remember how deep we kind of got in conversation.
Yeah.
And that's honestly one reason why too that I was thinking like, hey, when I'm doing this podcast, like I'd love Henry to be on it because you had some really cool stories. You love getting deep and having deep convos. Because I think that was one
Yeah.
thing we had in common. We hate like small talk. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, I think since I was like a little kid, that's just like how I was. I think I was always curious about, I don't know. I mean, maybe at a younger age, I was like unaware of the fact that like that's what that was. But I think looking back on it now, I can say that I guess emotional intelligence has always been something that's been kind of there with me, and then therefore it's guided a lot of my conversations and friendships and relationships all throughout my life. And I think earlier, like when I was in middle school, high school, even into early college, I think that I felt like at difference with some of my friends because like I didn't know how they could just seamlessly seem like they didn't care about much. Like it was just about like whatever they were doing in the moment, and that was it, and there wasn't any depth to it. And I had a hard time understanding that back then. And I think now, as I've gotten older, I've realized that I'm just wired that way. That I just love the depth with people, and people are always going to present however they present, or they're going to talk about what's going on in their day to day. But there's always a backstory. There's always something deeper going on. There's something deeper going on that you may or may not know about. And I think it's my job, and it's my, maybe not even my job, but just what I like to do is I just like to ask the right questions to understand where people really are. And yeah, I've always been that way. So similar to yourself, I just kind of dive right in with people, and if they take it, great, and if they don't, they
Mhm.
don't. That's fine
Yeah.
too. It's not like I can't. At this stage of the game, I'm 29 years old. I definitely know how to find my way through a conversation if it's not going deep, but uh, I certainly like to go there.
Yeah, I love it. It's funny that you were born that way. Like, I don't think I was born that way. I think
Really?
that's something I had to learn. Yeah, so I've always like connecting with people, but I didn't have any form of emotional intelligence until like
Mm.
a few years ago when I started even understanding that I have more than just happy, sad, and mad.
Sure. Sure.
You know? So,
Yeah.
but if I think of all my relationships, I mean, I just think even back to even training with Nike as long as I did. I mean, I still created great connections, but I don't think I was aware of it. I think just naturally I like connecting, but I didn't go deep very often. So that's all new. That's been like a whole new journey for me. So it's funny to see it from the lens of kind of being born that way to someone who just like figures it out and is like, hey, I'm 3 or 4 years in of really trying to understand that stuff. But
Yeah, and I think it's like, I mean, it's a muscle, right? So like just like any muscle that you have in the body or just like any skill, you gotta sharpen that muscle. And it is interesting. I mean, just like any skill that's out there. I mean, some people are like, yeah, like you said, some people are born that way. Like you look at these like, child prodigies that like,
yeah,
at 3 found out that they could play incredible things. But then there's a really famous opera singer named Andrea Bocelli that I grew up listening to. My mom loved him, and he didn't get his break till he was 46 years old. He was like a janitor, and he's blind and was singing at the school he was, being the janitor for. And people heard his voice and was like, "Oh my God, this guy can sing." But all growing up, like he didn't have that. So it's just, you can't help whenever you catch the bug, but when you catch the bug of whatever your skill set is or whatever you like, it's there. And so I'm sure that we have like similar stories of like times that we've found ourselves getting deep with people or read certain situations. um it's just, I might have different stories from a time that I realized that when I was 9, and
yeah,
not knowing what to do about that, because you realize it but you don't have the words to like talk your way through it. So yeah,
yeah,
it's always been like a weird skill set for sure.
yeah. So true. I love that. So how this works, Henry. So what I do is I have a list of questions. I sent them to
For
you
sure.
earlier,
Hmm.
and basically what I'm going to do is just go through them. We're going to have good conversation, and yeah, just find some fun ways to connect throughout. So, let's start with the first one. So, what was growing up like for you?
um I would say it was like really, like if you think of like the traditional American, like growing up, that's what it was. So I'm a middle child. I have an older brother, younger sister. I grew up in a household where my parents were married. Um, I did all of the quote unquote normal things that you do growing up. I played sports. I hung out with my friends. Um, before I was in first grade, I moved 11 times, which is a really like unique fact about me, but like I don't really find myself like thinking about it too much. Like I don't know if it. I mean, I'm sure it. I'm sure it played some sort of effect into who I am today, but it's not something that I like think about. Like that shaped me. Um, but yeah, like I just remember growing up and feeling like I just had like a pretty quintessential childhood. And as I grew up and got more life experience, I look back and realize like I came from a very very like affluent area of St. Louis. Like I mean, even my fiance Paige, like she and I are the same age. We just grew up in different parts of St. Louis, and when she found out where I was from, she was like, "Oh, like you're from there." Because yeah, it's certainly like a very, you know, I was very blessed in my childhood and my upbringing. My parents did a great job raising myself and my 2 siblings. Like we look back and we have really fond memories of it. I just remember like from an early age, man, I just like wanted to play soccer. That was like what I wanted to do. I loved it. I loved being an athlete. My brother and sister were both athletes. My parents were athletes. It's something that we all bonded with. And so I was like doing all of the like travel sports. I was being part of those teams. But then also I think a big part of my childhood, and it wasn't necessarily my parents doing, but it was more so like my own doing around middle school. Like I got really into my faith, non-denominational Christianity. I got really, really into my faith. And I would say that if you were to ask someone that knew me in high school, they would say like, probably what they would say is like he was the Christian soccer player. Like because people very much like recognized that I was a soccer player. Like it was what I was. I was the captain of my high school and like all that stuff. But I was very, very, very rooted in my faith at that time. Um, and that was a me thing. Like my parents didn't really grow up that way. I just, oddly enough, I think when I was in 6th grade, I just like really wanted some friends, and I recognized that the group of guys that I wanted to be friends with were like going to this youth group. I didn't even know what that meant, and started going to the youth group in hopes of being friends with them. And I think there was this like itch that was scratched in that like depth category that we just referred to. Like I realized that there was like this like depth that came with like faith and talking about theology and things like that that I didn't have anywhere else in my life. And I just became really ingrained with it. And I feel like that's an important thing to share because it really shaped who I became. And certainly it shapes kind of like my um my morals now, even though like I wouldn't say now, like I couldn't tell you the last time I read my Bible. I listen to church podcasts now. I haven't been to a church in a long time. But I definitely have a very strong faith and grew up that way. But on the surface, you may not know that about me if you like just met me, because I don't talk about it very much. But when I was growing up, it was a really big thing. Yeah, I would just say like I kind of got to high school and that became more of a thing for me, and I started branching off in my even in my own family of like just kind of carving my own path and being like being like my own leader, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's like a weird thing to say, but like I was so interested in this like theology thing. I was so fascinated with it, but then like my parents didn't have that. Like they didn't have that skill set, they didn't have that knowledge, so I stopped looking at my parents to provide that. And that's like a really interesting decision to make at like 13 years old when you're like, my parents don't have anything else to teach me, which is not true. I've learned a lot from them in the last, 16 years, whatever it's been, but like I just became like a really big individual and I became really self-sufficient. And, I started working when I was 12 years old. I started refereeing high school. And since then, I've worked, all the time in my life and stopped asking my parents for things when I was 12. Like when I started making my own money, I was like, I don't need my parents to buy me anything. And so stopped asking for like Christmas gifts and birthday presents, which I'm sure they loved. But like, yeah, it was just like an interesting growing up. But I look back with a lot of fondness on my upbringing, and I was very close with my brother and my sister. I'm still very close with them now. After I graduated college, like I said, I moved away for a little bit, and my siblings and I, we were all in different parts of the country, and now we're all back in St. Louis, and it's really special to me, and we get to spend a lot of good time together. But I really enjoyed my childhood. I don't know if I would go, honestly, I don't know if I would go back and change anything. I wish I would have had like a different kind of mentor in my life for sure, but like, um, yeah, I don't know if I would change anything. I had a great upbringing.
It's awesome. It's funny. Some of that stuff kind of mirrors me too. So I grew up in a non-denominational church as well. Were you guys? Was it weird?
What do you
Because
mean?
this is the thing. What this is so this is what I'll say. So
Yeah.
I remember going to this non-denominational church. I don't know why that's so hard to say right now, but uh, yeah,
The fear
literally
of
we went
God's in
there,
you, man. You're getting
and it
spooked.
was exactly. It's funny because it was so normal to me and my friends and stuff, and like we would go to this church, we enjoyed it, we hung out, etc. And I remember them always saying to being like, "Yeah, and people out there just think we're just crazy people." I'm like, "Nah, this is all just so normal." And then now when I go back to that church, I'm like, "Yeah, it's kind
You're
of
like, it
it's
was
kind of
kind of
wild.
crazy.
It's
I don't
kind of
know.
kind of
I think like honestly, I feel really blessed for the church that I was in. Like, I
yeah,
mean, I think as I've gotten older, I've developed more opinions on things, and I'm happy to dive into a theological conversation with anyone, because
yeah,
I think, especially as I got into like my early mid 20s, I'm not up there like debating anyone. I'm not up there anything like that.
yeah,
But nowadays, just to give like a quick preface, nowadays I have like a really big problem with like the capital C church, not like the church I grew up in, but like the church as a whole, because I think that as a whole, the capital C church just ignores a lot of like scripture and um, Jesus saying like the greatest of all commandments is to like love your neighbor, and people are just like, no, fuck that, forget that one, but all the other stuff, let's focus on that. So like, I have
yeah.
issues with it now, and like, but the thing is that like, the greatest of all commandments is to love others like you love me. Like that really stuck with me, and it still sticks with me to this day. And I think it shapes a lot of who I was. But I think my church was really like normal. And I think that even the pastor that's there, he's still there. I think he's one of the best speakers I've ever heard in my entire life. He's brilliant. He Before being a pastor, he was the guy whose dad was a pastor. And so he was like, I'm never going to be a pastor. I'm not going to do that. I don't want to do that. I don't want whatever. He was like a practicing psychologist for
Yeah, yeah.
years, and
Uh-huh.
then just like led a Bible study. And then the Bible study grew, and then like
Yeah.
it grew and it grew. And then now it's a church. So like he didn't mean to be a pastor. It just happened. And so a lot of what I connected with is he always did this really great thing of tying faith, which can sometimes be like this like head in the clouds. It's faith, some of it isn't
Yeah.
fact based. Like you have to actually have faith to do it.
Yep.
But he would tie that in with like science. And like even from a really young age, he was always like, it's not science or God, it's science and God, and would always just intertwine it. And so like I felt like it was always presented to me in a way that just made a lot of sense. until I got a little bit older, in which case people are flawed and people are human, and some of those things that I have a problem with now, like within the church, just showed their face. Like it is what it is. Like anytime
Yeah.
you're around a group of people for a long time, you're going to see stuff. But I think the fallacy is that like you believe the people who are like within the church or working in the church, they're going to be this like perfect image, and they're not, because they're
Mhm.
humans. But
Yep.
then you hold them to this different standard because they're part of the church. Like it's just this whole thing. And so, no, I don't think that it was weird. I don't think that it was odd when I look back on like the church aspect. Now, the part that was a little bit weird was I was part of this outside of just my church. I was part of this like ministry that went around to different like schools and churches and all this stuff, and like promoted healthy living choices is what they called it. But really it was like this like faith-based organization that was like talking about like abstinence and refraining from like drugs, sex, and alcohol. And that was like a really big part of my identity all throughout like middle school and high school. I was like very attached to this group. And now that I'm a couple of years older, everyone was just doing the best they could. You know, like no
Yeah.
one was out there intentionally being malicious. But I think it honestly wasn't until I was probably about 26, 27 until I realized like how detrimental that was. And having this refrain, like no, 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 abstinence in every aspect, like it actually kind of like fucked me up a little bit mentally, and it like changed a lot of how I viewed things for a while. It was like really, really hard to break out of that, and to break out of that like shell shock. And there was definitely some weird aspects of that. And I recognize it now more at 29 than I did at 16 and than I did at 15. Um, where again, like if I was like talking to 16-year-old me, I would just have some different conversations. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So fortunately the church wasn't weird, but I definitely had my fair share of weird quote unquote church experiences, even though it wasn't like at my church, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because even when I think about it, I mean, I don't think necessarily that my experience was super weird either, but it was just like, it's funny because some of my friends that I still hang out with, even my ex-wife, we all went to the same church
Sure.
as a kid. But what was funny is like my experience and their experience is way different. And I don't know if
Mm.
it's because I didn't like latch onto any ideals like way too strong, maybe because I was just
Yeah.
like, oh, I like that idea. That's a cool concept, or I love that thought process. Whereas I think they really latched on to every idea as like, oh, that's it, right? Just like you're talking
Mhm.
about, like abstinence and all this stuff like that.
Sure.
They just latched onto those ideas, and now like, a lot of them are kind of struggling these days, and it's kind of
Yeah.
unfortunate. And like I said, it's not the Bible or Christianity. It's like the church, right? Like
Well,
certain aspects of it.
it's hard to take the like emotional like the emotional attachment that we may have to church or faith
Yep.
or
Yep.
whatever. And even for people listening that aren't, maybe they're not faith-based and they just have
Yep.
opinions on faith as a whole, which they're totally allowed to have.
Yeah.
But when you just think about it as like a mental construct and as like a philosophical debate, if
Hmm.
for years and 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 years you've said no to this,
Hmm.
and now you're trying to figure out how to not say no anymore and how to like welcome a new perspective into the space that for years you said no to, and created a
Hmm.
lot of harm and created a lot of identity crises for people and created a lot of division and created a lot of wars,
Yeah.
like bloodshed and
Yes.
all of this stuff. And now you're in this space of like, let's maybe we'll relook at that. It's hard, right?
Yeah.
Like it's really
Yep.
hard. And I think even within like just, I can't speak on other denominations, but even within
Yeah.
like Christianity, like how to be an industry leader on some topics that are really difficult to talk about in the masses, it's hard. And it's also vulnerable as fuck for like a pastor to stand up there and be like, hey, this is maybe what we think about this and this is what we should be doing. And it's really, really difficult. And so I think something that I've always admired about my church is they broke things up within Christianity. And I still talk about this to this day with people who like want to talk about faith. I'm like always open to the conversation, but they talked about what are deal breakers and what are not deal breakers. There are things within the Christian faith that are 100% deal breakers. For example, a very common deal breaker is, do you believe that Jesus not only is who he says that he was, but he also died a very real death and then resurrected from death 3 days later? That is like a core tenet of the Christian faith. If someone was like, I like all the Christianity stuff, but that, I don't know if I get down with that. That is like one of the few things that like you have to agree on. But something like, did creation in Genesis, did creation happen in 7 days, or were days a metaphor for like millions of years or thousands of years or whatever it is? We don't actually know that. There's scientific data to back up there's like, lasted over thousands and millions of years. Not a deal breaker. Whether
Yep.
you believe it's 7 days or 7 million years, not a deal breaker. That's not going to make you more or less strong in your faith, if that makes sense. But
Yeah.
there are deal breakers. And so I think as I've gotten older and as specifically as I've looked at like the pie chart of life of where does faith or spirituality exist for me, I think I've just got really clear on like my deal breakers. And one of them is like how you treat other people, how you love other people. And
Yep.
so I have a hard time sometimes when I look at like the Christian religion and I watch how they're treating very specific groups of people, and I'm like, I don't want any part of that. Like that's
Yeah.
not even what God tells us to do. So like
Yeah.
yeah, I think the
Yep.
churches are having a really hard time acclimating to that. And again, it takes really powerful leadership to be vulnerable enough to even say, hey, we fucked this up. Like maybe this was not our best option that we've chosen for years and years and years and years and years and years and years. Um, my bad, and that's not going to fix anything, but like you
Yeah.
just have to be vulnerable enough to share it. So yeah, I think they're struggling a lot, and it's also creating like I think like a really big divide in like the generations of like, how do you still speak to the youth being like, the teenagers, not, how do you speak to the youth in a way that like teaches them like who God is, but also in a way that like allows them to experience life? I don't know. I think that it's a really interesting thing. And sometimes when I think about having kids in the future, I'm like, that'll just be an interesting way of handling that.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny, I actually really like you mentioned your pastor went at it in a psychological way, right?
Yeah.
And I love that. It's funny because I think there's so much room to your point, right? I think there's some stuff that's like pretty set in stone, but then there's a whole lot of stuff that can be interpreted in
Sure.
different ways, right? And what's interesting is I think what opened my eyes to that was I went to a church here in Kansas City that was I love their concept of what they used to be is they had like six pastors, which is kind of weird, right? To
Yeah.
have more than one pastor, right? But why they did that and they would cycle is so you could get different perspectives. And one of the pastors I absolutely loved. Like every time I was there, I was literally like, okay, what's he going to bring this time? Like I'm
Yeah.
excited. Because what he
Yeah.
would do is he would look at it from a really like he'd simplify it and he'd bring it in a very historical approach. Like he'd bring back kind of like what was going on in the time during this time, what this potentially means, and everything he went at. He was always like, if it was opinion, he would say like, this is kind of my opinion on this, or this
Yeah.
is kind of what I think.
He'd like call it out.
Exactly, which I
Yeah.
really appreciated because I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of stuff in there that it is kind of opinion based. It's kind of what we kind of feel best makes sense. Whereas I've been, which is funny because actually that church, they decided to stop having the six pastors and go to one pastor, like a new
Yeah.
pastor. And he came in and he was way the opposite. And I had to leave. Like I literally had to leave
Yeah.
that church because like he was literally like, okay, I'm going to tell you about what exactly happens when you die
Yeah.
for fact. And I'm like, hold on a second. Okay, tell me what you got.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I don't know, man. I don't know how you can say with 100% accuracy on something like that, especially the stuff he was saying. And I was like, man, I'm not a big fan of that, right? I like when people give room for like, this is my opinion, this is what I think. Kind of
Sure.
brings some really good approaches in that space. But yeah, that was kind of an
Yeah.
interesting aspect.
Yeah. And I think also there seems to be like a rigidity around religion in general that I
Yeah.
just like don't think Jesus would have, man. If
Nope.
he was walking amongst us, like I think Jesus would be like pretty witty, and he'd probably be the guy that you want to have a beer with and talk to
Exactly.
and all
Yes.
that stuff. And I think it was something that like opened my eyes as a kid, uh, that I probably should have paid more attention to at the time. My youth pastor growing up loved the guy. He was awesome. He was so good. I remember there was this like, I think I was in seventh grade, and there's this like other kid at the youth group who like after one of the like services at youth group came up to me and started like crying to me about like something going on at home between like his parents, heavy stuff.
Yeah.
In the seventh grade, I don't know how to handle this, so I'm like, let's go find Rob. So I bring Rob over,
Yeah.
and Rob's listening to this kid like pour out their heart and whatever. And Rob, after they're done, just looks at this kid and just goes, man, sometimes situations are just really shitty. And we're like sitting at the church, and
Yeah.
it kind of like woke me up a little bit, and I was like,
Yeah.
whoa. And I brought that up to him like 2 years later. We got the opportunity to go do some thing. And I brought that up to him because at that time I was a freshman in high school, and I'm like, my friends are like drinking and like trying drugs and shit, and they're like talking about stuff. And I'm just like, I don't know how to feel about all this stuff. And then I remember we were like literally playing basketball together one time, and I was like, how do you know like what the boundaries are? Like, do you remember that 2 years ago you said shit in the middle, like whatever. And he
Yeah.
was just like, he's like, yeah, I mean, it's a fair question. I can't tell you like a black and white answer. It's all gray. And at the same time, you're going to feel pressured throughout your life to be really uptight because you think that the way that you're probably going to interpret scripture, and maybe even something I say to you at some point in our relationship, is going to make you feel like you have to be like the bearer of all rightfulness and righteousness in the world. And sometimes you just can't take yourself that seriously, and it's okay to say shit, and it's okay to say fuck, and it's whatever. And I
Yeah.
think what's funny is like, I listened to that, and that was really true to me. And then over the next couple of years, I got the most uptight I've ever been in my entire life over the next couple of years. And I look back on that
Yeah.
now at 29, and I'm like, man, what good advice that was when I was 14. Like that's it. Like that's it. Like that was such good advice. And I wish that I listened to that like throughout the next 6 years of my life, because it probably would have
Yeah.
saved me a lot of things. Um, but he just had this like really, really graceful way about him that he wasn't wavering. Like he was
Yeah.
never like telling me that things were okay when he didn't feel like they were, but he was just gracious all the time. And I remember that being like, damn, that was really cool. And I wish that like I remember that a little bit more in my life.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's funny to like to your point too about the rigidity. Like, I don't think churches realize that like they are the Pharisees sometimes, right? Like,
Totally. We want to get
totally,
theological. If we want to dive into that, listeners,
exactly,
look up that word. Look up that word in scripture.
exactly,
Yeah.
right? Because no, you're totally right. Like, because it's not about behaving a certain way or putting on this facade or whatever. It's being real. And to your point, I mean, that's exactly how I felt Jesus was, right? And I think about his disciples too. People who followed him, they were like the most normal, like
There
I
are
mean,
also a bunch
people,
of lunatics, bro.
flawed people. Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. But that's what's so cool is like
Yeah.
those are the people he hung out with, and those were the people
Totally.
that were right by him. And I just think that that's so funny to think about that because I think we get so caught up in details that we forget like that picture, right? We forget
For
that part.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think now, like I mentioned earlier, that like I haven't been to church in a long time, but I listen to church podcasts. There's a guy named Judah Smith. He's a pastor, technically based out of Seattle, but he kind of like does church services in Seattle and LA, and he only does 2 services a month. That's it. Like in-person services. And by in-person, he might be preaching at one of the locations. The other one is like, video chatted in or whatever it's called. The other 2 Sundays a month, he just does like a little 15-minute podcast thing. And he's
yeah,
so like, one, he's really like relevant and current and all that stuff, and I really appreciate that. Like he's not hiding behind any of the weird stuff that's going on in the world. But the other thing that I appreciate so much about him is he's like, bro, do you think that Jesus came back for the people in this room? Like he did. Don't get me wrong, like he did, but he like came back to go talk with everyone who's not in this room right now. Go talk to your neighbor. Like
yeah,
go like you want to come here and like feel really good and worship, and that's great, and like we're not going to stop doing that because that's so necessary. When was the last time you talked to your next door neighbor? How many scriptures are there out there talking about like love your neighbor, get close to your neighbor, treat your neighbor with like all this stuff? I'm paraphrasing scripture
Yeah.
now, but he's like, how many times does it say go to church and spend 3 hours there and work? Like he's like none. Go talk
Yep.
to your neighbor. So he's just like he's so adamant about like churches have kind of lost the plot a little bit, and like if you're going to like put on this, like this is so funny that we're talking about faith on this because like I don't
Yeah.
really talk to many people about this, but like if you're gonna like say like, hey, I'm a believer of Jesus and I like live his life out, go and do it. Like, and go do it in private. Go do it in ways that people aren't going to be like, there goes the Christian soccer player, look at him go, like me back in high
Yeah.
school. But like go do it in ways that people will never sing your praises about, and go be that for the world. And I think that that's the bigger challenge now. I think when I was in high school, I don't think that it's bad to think this way, but I used to be like, I feel like one day I'm going to be like the person on, I thought I was going to be a pastor when I was in high school. I'm going to be the person on the stage leading a church of, a couple hundred. And then like now I'm like, that's not me, but I can make really big impact in my day-to-day relationships, my day-to-day conversations. And people, scripture talks about like people will know that you are a believer based on how you treat them. I believe that. I believe that there is like a difference. And I've had a couple conversations in my life where people are like, what's the deal with like that? Like, why do you do that? And I'm like, well, let's talk about it, So, whereas I think back in high school, I'd be like, do you know Jesus? Let's talk about the Lord and Savior. Where now I find that it's a little more approachable, and I say shit and fuck sometimes. So like, whatever, Yeah.
Dude, can't agree more. And I think
Yeah.
it's all about actions, right? And when we think about change, like if we want the world to be a better place, like it really doesn't happen on a societal level. Like we try to put laws and different things in place to change societies. It almost never works. But it's like on an individual level, right? So it's like to your point, having that faith, helping your neighbor, like actually going out and doing things to
Yeah.
help, right? I think that's where the big changes actually starts with you.
Yeah.
So
It is interesting though. Like I feel like for a big part of my life, I would look at things like laws,
yeah.
whatever, and I'd be like, hopefully that like makes something happen.
Yeah.
Interesting part of like the world right now is like laws are being put in place, and I'm like, oh fuck, that's gonna do the opposite of help people. So
Yes.
like
Yep.
there's just a lot of weirdness going on right now, especially when it comes to like politics and policy and choices being overturned and all of this stuff where I'm like, yo, it's gonna get real weird here. It's
Yeah.
already weird, but it's gonna get even weirder in the next couple of months. And people need a lot of grace. People need a lot of love, and people need a lot of like willingness to be in conversation and community with people. And hopefully, those Christians are gonna lead the way on having some of those conversations and pioneering like opening up community forums where people can talk about like the impact of like societal changes and like the things that are happening to people. Hopefully the church opens up their doors to that, and I don't know if they will, but that would be a really cool place to start to like rebuild trust in the communities. But there's a penny for my thoughts. If you're listening, church, capital C church.
I love it. Sweet. Okay, cool. So childhood, you said your childhood was like just to paraphrase.
Mm-hmm.
So you said your
I
childhood was pretty
friends
good.
home. What?
You moved. Here we go. Let's see what I can do.
Let's
You
see.
moved.
No.
You moved 11 times, but you felt normal about that, right?
Yeah, totally.
So you were the soccer. You were the church soccer kid.
Mm-hmm.
But then you kind of found your way as far as now what you believe, right? The church is to you and what faith is,
Sure.
etc. Um, so now if we kind of go to kind of like now, so what's like one of the biggest struggles that you're going through or that you've made it through?
Yeah. I would say like it kind of perfectly segues into it. So I was 19, um, again, the Christian soccer kid that was in high school, and now I was the Christian soccer kid in college. Played soccer in college. I literally like got back from working a summer Kanakuk. You know about Kanakuk because that's where you grew up. I worked,
I do.
Kanakuk for an entire summer, and was like on fire and came back my sophomore year of college. And literally like October of my sophomore year of college, I kid you not, when you look at like every pillar of what makes up a human being, everything shit hit the fan in every direction in my life. And I know
No.
like not
Uh,
even an over exaggeration, in
yeah.
every single area of my life, all of it hit the fan. Like in 1 month, it was my parents, my parents were their relationship was completely deteriorating in front of our eyes. I decided that I was gonna like transfer universities to like go play soccer at a different university. So like I was immediately kind of like cut off from my teammates. That coach that I played for started saying all of this weird shit about me. So not only like did my teammates, I didn't have teammates anymore. They all were like, well, fuck this guy. He thinks he's better than us, whatever. So, like, I lost that. So, friends were kind of like out the window. Also, like, my church world came like crumbling down at the exact same time. So, again, this like identity of who I was as this like Christian soccer player, like, was just no longer. And I like hit my version of rock bottom. And there may be another rock bottom at some point in my life, but in these 29 years, that was it. And I like didn't it sounds how it sounds, but like I didn't know who I was. Like it was like literally life just like stopped. I didn't know what was going on, you know? I didn't know if this was like again to bring the faith thing into it. I didn't know if this was like God punishing me for like unrepented sin in my life. Like what the fuck was happening, or if this was just sometimes bad things happen to good people. Like I mean, it was
Yeah.
just like it was crazy. The crazy is not even like half of it. Like I mean, it was wild. Um, and through that time, I one found therapy because at that point I had never gone to therapy before. And two, I got like mentored by like two of the pastors at my church. One of them being that same youth pastor that I brought up a second ago. The other one was just like another pastor at my church, and those guys, I walked. I say that it was very like church phrase of me, but I walked through life with them like twice a week for 8 months. I didn't have anyone else. I didn't have my parents because they were going through their own thing. I didn't have any friends at the time. I didn't have any close relationships. So like I spent a lot of time with them. I would like go to the church, we'd talk for a couple hours, sometimes we go to eat, sometimes we would whatever. And those guys like between that and going to therapy, um for the first time in my life at 19 years old into 20 years old, I like learned how to be authentic, which is like a funny thing to learn because you just assume that you just are authentic, but I didn't know how to do that at the time. Like just to give a little bit more context, I mentioned that I was like really, really uptight when it came to like the way things should be. Should was my favorite word in the entire world. And so it was like all these things that I should be doing as like a believer of Jesus. And I was like directly going up against like college, meaning like I kind of think girls are really cute. What do I do about that? Like my all of my teammates are like drinking and doing drugs and stuff, and like what do I think about that? Like, all of these things I didn't have anyone to talk to because I had to like uphold this image that I was this Christian soccer player, and my world came crumbling down and I didn't know who I was anymore. And so these guys literally like they asked me, so to answer your question, that was the most challenging thing that I ever went through, that thing. And it just, the recovery process from that lasted a really long time. But one of the things that they had me do, they literally said, for as long as you can take it. So open assignment was basically because I had lost over time the ability to be authentic, to be genuine. They just basically had me start questioning my motives behind everything that I did. So, for example, we're in a group of people, someone says something, I jump in and I make a joke, right? Natural, whatever. They're like, okay, why'd you make the joke? Who was your audience? What were you trying to do? What were you like? Were you trying to get people to like you? Were you trying to whatever? Like, what was the motive? Or like, if I decided to say hi to someone in the cafeteria, but I didn't decide to say hi to that person, what was I doing? Was I trying to, all of this stuff, right? So I was just like questioning every move that I did. And I lasted like 2 weeks of doing it. like literally 2 weeks. I couldn't take it anymore because I just realized over time how many decisions I was making for other people, and like for the affection of other people, or for other people to think a certain way about me. That was probably the biggest one. I wanted you to believe this like image of who I was. And around that time that I like kind of came back to these two guys with that insight of like, I think I'm trying to be this, but I also have this side of me, right? Like the side that I didn't like to show people, and the side that I now call like my shadow self, shout out
Yeah.
therapy.
Yep.
But what these guys suggested was like, up until now, you've been trying to convince people that you are this, let's just call it like the highest version of yourself. Like you're the knight in shining armor. You're that, like nothing gets through to you. Like you're this like perfect image. But you've also, because you're human, been battling these demons, and you're trying to show people that you're not that. And most people would tell you, hey, like if you want to get better, you got to let go of those demons, man. You got to like just white knuckle the shit out of life, so like those demons don't come back up, and just be that knight in shining armor. They were suggesting, they're like, both of them have to die. Like, in order for you to move forward in this world authentically and genuinely, you actually have to say goodbye to both of them. You have to say goodbye to this like image that you're trying to uphold, and you have to be okay with being less than that. And you also have to say goodbye to the things that like are not serving you in your life, but you also have to acknowledge their presence in your life. Like, that is what makes you you. And so I remember at one point I felt so like shameful about like this like shadow side of myself, and I was like pouring out like all of these things and to that youth pastor, and he basically just looked at me, and he was like, so you're telling me that you're not perfect? And I was like, no, I'm not perfect, like, I'm so sad, whatever. And he was like, well, between you and me, you're the last person to realize that you're not perfect, so welcome to the chat. No one ever thought you were the only one thinking that you were. So like, they just really
Uh,
taught me how to be
yeah.
authentic. And I think after that was literally like, I think back to like my junior year of college, which is, a couple months after that October. And it was like a complete rebuilding year, which sounds funny. Like, I ended up not transferring. Funny story, the coach that I was going to go play for at this other university ended up coming to my current university. So he was like, you can't go, you got to come, you got to stay. And I was like, cool. So I did that, but I had to like rebuild the trust with my teammates. I had to like rebuild the trust with people in my community, and I had to like refigure out who I was. And around that similar time, like, I also found Lululemon, and I worked for Lululemon for a really long time. But that's significant to me because at that point, the only thing that had like tickled that itch of like depth and connection and whatever was church. And then I went to Lululemon, and like from the get-go, it was all about depth, it was all about core values, it was all about goals, it was all about being the best version of yourself, but not this fictitious version of yourself. And they're out here claiming like the universe provides, and the universe does this, and the universe that. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? So like, during that time, I was also
Yeah.
trying to like figure out like, what is the universe, and what is this yoga that they're talking about, and what is this mind body connection, and what, I don't want to talk about the breath. Like, so it was like all of these things that I was learning my junior year. And I look back at that time, and while I had like all of the people I was close with in like high school and middle school, I'm no longer close with, and they certainly weren't close to me during that time. I look back and I think about, there's this like one person in my life in particular that like I look back and I'm like, I kind of think she was like an angel, to be honest with you. I can think back to like really, really, really pivotal conversations that I had with her, not about like life and death and crazy shit, but like it was as if God just like plucked her out of the clouds and just implanted her in my life, and just opened myself up to like how I can interpret the world around me. And I have so much of who I am today dedicated to like those three relationships that I just shared with you. Um, so what came out on the other side of it was like this, this desire for authenticity and this desire for connection. And if anyone's listening to this that like actually knows me, they'd be like, well, of course, like, duh, that's who he is. But like, that wasn't who I was in high school, early college. Like, that was birthed from this really, really, really challenging thing that I went through 10 years ago now, which is also kind of crazy to say, but yeah, almost 10 years ago now. Yeah, it's turned me into who I am today.
Dude, you hit a big point there too. Like, it's the struggles and the pains, it's those dark times that really mold us, right? It's
Hmm.
really interesting. So when I think about that too, is like I actually related a lot with, what you said. And I think people don't understand the word authenticity, I don't think very well.
Yeah.
I think, in my opinion, I think everybody, the first thing you ask is like someone, tell me, what are some of your core values? And everybody's gonna say authenticity, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Sounds really
but
good. It's a big
it
word.
does, it
Yeah.
does sound good. But
Yeah.
like the thing is, like, if I think about pre my divorce, like, would I have said I was authentic? I would have said yes, right? I have all these individual things I'm into, yada yada yada. But I don't think I understood, like, yeah, those were like unique interests, but that didn't mean I was authentic, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, it took like the divorce and just like a lot of really tough things to happen, all basically, right? Kind of like what you said, to really kind of discover like myself, right? And I
Yeah.
think a big part of it, people don't understand, like, you need to integrate with that shadow side. Like, you have to
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
understand it. And so many people run from it. And I think about it and I was like, before that, like, yeah, I wasn't authentic because I was actually kind of running from that, right? I didn't want,
Yeah.
like, I was trying to be that same thing, like you said, knight in shining armor, that perfect person. And yeah, it's just such an interesting thing. Like, and then thinking back to like that's like through that divorce, like that time, like, was terrible. But at the same time, it's like, wow, like I would not change at all who
Totally.
I was, for who I was before then, right? And what came out of those tough moments is authenticity, right? And I think that
Yeah.
that's a huge, huge piece of it. And yeah, it's not easy. And I, I'm sure you and I both, we're still not authentic at times, right? Like, we're
Yeah.
doing our
For
best, but
sure.
at least we're aware now, right? And we
Yeah.
we know when we are, we know when we're not, and maybe there's still stuff we're
Yeah,
blind to, but it's
and I
important.
think like for people who are like listening that are like, I think I'm authentic, I don't know if I am. Like I think like just an easy exercise that you can take as in depth as you want to take it is just like look look at like areas of your life. Like look at your friendships, relationships, work, your physical health, your financial health, whatever it is, and just like literally ask yourself, how do I feel about that? Like what is my opinion of that, not what anyone else is, like not what my parents
Hmm.
think about it or anything like that, but just like how do I feel about work, right? Like we'll start with that. How do I feel about work? 1 to 10. And let's just say it's a 10. Cool. Let's say it's a 6. Cool. It doesn't matter what the number is, but the follow up is, do my actions align with how I feel about something? Because like if work is a 6 out of 10 and you're out here telling everyone it's a 10 out of 10, or like you're showing up and you're like, whoa, best job ever, but you actually feel like a 6, I wouldn't say that that's like the most authentic way of showing up. Now, if you feel like something's a 3, am I saying being a miserable motherfucker is the way to go? No. But like just ask yourself, do your actions align with how you feel about things? If you feel like one of your friendships isn't serving you, are you still like going out to dinner with them and like posting on Instagram like, "Oh my god, loved catching up with my girl over drinks," like, or are you saying like, "Hey, probably this relationship doesn't serve me and I'm just going to distance myself a little bit." Like one is very authentic, one isn't, and what I don't want people to think is like being authentic good, not being authentic bad. Like in theory, I guess, but like you just said, I would love to say that I'm 100% authentic all the time. And today I had a conversation with someone where I'm like, I was not honest fully in that
Right.
conversation. I could have been more honest. But again, it's the awareness of like, am I choosing more authentic communication? Am I choosing more authentic feelings more than I'm not? Am I choosing more authenticity than less
Yep.
authenticity? So it's a spectrum and it's a lifelong practice. And, um, it's the work. That's the work. When I talk about the work, that's the work. Yeah. Yeah.
I totally agree. Totally agree.
Yeah.
One practice that I always liked is, well, not practice, I wouldn't say, but a thing I've observed for a long time is I always like questioning people's music tastes.
Sure.
You know why? Because, and I think it's for that reason. I didn't know why before that, but I was thinking, but it makes sense because, like, if people are only like anytime I go, you've heard me, like, I go to stores,
Yeah.
like, hey, tell me what's your favorite artist right now, or what's your walkout song if you were a WWE wrestler, right? We make fun of that, and notice like most people's answers are almost the same,
Yeah.
and I always get curious, like, so think about that for a second. So, do you like the music you're into because you chose it, or because
Other
it's
people
on
like
the
it.
radio and it's popular,
Yeah.
or because your friends like it? I always question that. So when
I
people
feel that
always
way
throw out
about
popular names,
fashion.
do you? Okay,
Like,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. And because like, I work at Nike now and I worked at Lululemon prior, I'm like always cognizant and I'm aware of what people are wearing. It's like I don't judge it. I don't care.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
there are things that I like to wear, there are things I don't like to wear, but I'm always like, why are you wearing that? Like,
Hmm.
you look uncomfortable. Like,
Yeah,
like, and maybe
yeah,
comfort is not your goal, and that's fine. Maybe you're just like, I
yeah.
just want to look really, really, really good because I like that. Like, that's fine. I don't care. But like, I do the same thing with fashion of like, do you like the clothes you're wearing, or like, are you doing it because you think that's what you need to do? Again, even if the answer is because that's what I think I need to do, it's not wrong. It's just like, okay, that gives me like, because I think about like my kids later in life, right? Like, I don't have kids yet, but when I do, there will inevitably be a time where I have a conversation with them where they definitely are doing something because the group is doing something.
Yeah.
Happens. It's not wrong. It's
Hmm.
like you just need to be cognizant if you're making more of those decisions than you're making decisions for yourself. That's where it becomes an issue. But if you want to wear something because you saw your friend wear it, you thought it was cute, whatever. Fuck it. Do it.
Yeah,
Go for it. Rock it. But like, yeah, if you're making all
yeah.
those decisions based on what other people want, it's probably not a good thing. It's not going to serve you either.
Agreed. Totally
Yeah.
agreed. Okay. So we talked about a struggle you went through that you made it through. Now, what's something that you're currently going through that's either positive or you could say negative?
It's like a both and situation. I just got shoulder surgery about 7 weeks ago, and this is like kind of a surfacey answer, but it's also impacting my life. So whatever, deal
Yeah.
with it, Ricky. I got shoulder surgery 7 weeks ago. I had like a complete labrum tear in my left shoulder, and I had to get surgery for it. Basically, I dislocated my shoulder a couple of years ago, being an idiot, skateboarding. I don't know how to skateboard, but I was, and dislocated my shoulder and kind of thought that everything was all good. And over the last couple of years, it's just started dislocating more and more and more and more. And over the last year specifically, it's gotten like a 1 time a week frequency, sometimes more, of my shoulder just completely popping out of socket. So ended up getting surgery, and that just kind of puts life on pause for a little bit. If you're watching this, I'm not wearing a sling. If you're listening to this, I'm not wearing a sling. But I was for 6 weeks, which means you can't really do anything with that arm. But what's interesting is now I'm out of a sling, but for another 6 weeks, I'm not able to lift anything, push anything, pull anything, carry anything. So I just have to be really, really patient. And for me, there's a question on here that you sent me later of like fun. What does fun look like for you, and what do you do for fun? And for me, like soccer is that. Like I love playing like 2 to 3 times a week. When I moved away to Charlotte, I had like just recently broken my leg in college, so I wasn't playing soccer at all. And then I was living in Colorado. I definitely wasn't playing soccer at all because I was up in the mountains. And when I moved back to St. Louis, I like rediscovered playing soccer, and it just like reignited this like little kid in me. And every single time I play, I have so much fun doing it. It's one of my favorite things in the entire world, and I'm not going to be able to do that until it's July that we're recording this. We're not going to be. I'm not going to be able to do this until late October, early November. So like I'm just going through that. I'm going through like how do I stay physically engaged and physically active when soccer's no longer my medium, but it's also I can't go to the gym, or I can go to the gym, but I can't lift anything. So it's like, do you just go ride the exercise bike? It's a million degrees in St. Louis, so like I don't want to go on walks, but like I'm trying to figure that out. So I'm just like figuring that out, in the connection between like mind and body and spirit is so strong. So like being stagnant or like not as active as I am normally used to, I'm just like catching where that shows up in other areas of my life where I'm like, okay, I just don't have that like physical release of endorphins and sport or anything, that I just feel a little bit constricted a little bit. And that's what I would say that I'm working through at the moment.
Yeah. Is it
Yeah.
kind of like grieving? Are you kind of grieving what you're going through?
It's interesting because when I broke my leg, it was definitely grieving. I broke my
Yeah.
leg my senior year of college during a game. And prior to that, I had like wanted to like play professionally, and I wanted to like commit my life to like going and do that. So when I broke my leg in the middle of a game, I was like grieving the fact that I just broke my leg. And I'm like,
Yeah.
ow, that's crazy. I was also grieving the fact that like my collegiate career was over. Like that was done. That was it. And then also I was grieving the fact that I'm not going to be playing professional soccer, and I'm whatever. And now it's definitely not grieving as much as it is like just patience because like I can't wait to come back. Like the first time with my leg, it was like you're never gonna play again and you're never gonna be
Yeah.
at this level again and whatever. And now I'm like, brother, like I was in a really good like flow before I got shoulder surgery. I can get right back there, but now my shoulder's not gonna pop out. Possibilities are endless. So it's not so much grieving as much as it is like just reminding myself to be patient, which I don't always like doing, but that's what it more so is, just like a really big practice in patience.
I like that. It kind of goes back to you talking about faith, right? So like knowing
Hmm.
that you're going to be there one day, and when you are there, guess what? You're going to function better than you've ever done it before,
Yes.
right? So that's
Yeah.
really cool.
It's also just like the trust that that is how the body works,
Yeah.
like I've been fortunate enough to like never not have a surgery up until 29 years old. And so there was a little bit of like apprehension of like, do I do this? Do I not do this? I don't know, but eventually you just have to trust that it's like it's all going to work and you're going to come back stronger. So I'm like, all right, here we go. So that's what I'm working through right now. Yeah, I would really like to play. I would say about 4 times a week I get to a point where I'm like, man, I would really like to go play. Yeah.
Dang.
Makes me wonder how I went so long in between college and moving back to St. Louis that I went so long without it, because now it's yeah, it's what I love.
Isn't it funny how that happens? Like I was thinking about like my workout journey is a good example. Like after the divorce, I got back into the gym because I just like I need something to help physically, mentally, emotionally,
Totally.
everything, right? And the gym was that for me. And it's funny because going back, I was how did I go like six
Yeah.
years without working out? Like what was I
Totally.
thinking? And back then, if I think about it, I thought I was fine. I was like, no,
Yeah.
I'm good. I don't need it. And it's just funny how like, yeah, when you get to a place where, yeah, you're playing soccer frequently,
Yep.
you're working out at the gym, that when you kind of it becomes part of your life and it makes you feel so good that you forgot that like why was I even not doing it
Yeah,
at some point?
like it goes back to like what I was saying about like mind body connection, your
Yeah.
soul. Like so outside of like my professional life and like whatever, I also have like I'm working towards like my coaching certification and like, life coaching and like all that shit. And like one of the things that there's like an exercise and like a practice that if a client or someone is like really stuck in like what they're doing or what they're talking about, physically getting them to embody whatever they're talking about. Like, okay, you can't tell me how you're feeling, show me. Like, show me. So is it like, are you starfishing? Are you standing really, small? Are you like huddled over? Like, are you a ball on the ground? Like, show me how you're feeling. And it's a way to just like use your body as a method of communication that sometimes your mind can't do. But equally so, whenever you're like working through something emotionally, physical release and physical movement literally helps your body. It's like a lubricant to the rest of your body. So like that's why people say if you're ever stuck on something, go take a walk. It literally helps you do it. So yeah, I just I'm just craving going faster. You know what I'm saying? I'm like
Yeah,
walking's
yeah.
cool. And like I do. I like every day I crave going on a walk and like I'll look at my schedule. I'm like, damn, I don't know if I'm gonna have time to go do that today. But like um I would just like to like, I don't know, throw in a weight every once in a while or like kick a ball. So I'm eagerly anticipating that.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine that being tough.
Yeah, especially right now. There's like the Euros and the Copa America. It's like two of the biggest soccer tournaments in the world. So I'm like watching soccer every day, and I'm like, fuck, this
So you're way
is
too motivated. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I
That's a great way of saying it. I'm way too motivated right now. I gotta
yeah,
like
yeah.
relax a little bit. Yeah.
Dude, if you're anything like me, I do the same thing. Like if you ever this might be funny. Maybe we'll do this one day. But if I ever watch a like combat film with really good martial arts,
Yes.
like after I'm done, I literally get up and I start punching and kicking things. Like I literally can't help it. Like
Yeah.
it's so ingrained in me that's like so I get that like you get
Yeah. It's like
motivated
being a
watching, you're like,
kid.
oh,
Yeah.
I gotta go do soccer like right now. Like you're just
Yeah.
jazzed. Right?
Yeah, I want it. I need it.
Yeah,
Yeah, and then like
exactly.
you can see behind me, like you have those like cleats behind me. I have the jerseys on the wall. I'm like,
Yeah.
golly, I'm not Lionel Messi, but like I could be. Like I could be that. Yeah, yeah.
Love that. Okay. So next question, which you might have answered already, but who is someone that has changed your life that doesn't know it?
I remember you asked me this question. Actually, like this was you asked me this question when we first met each other. This is for those of you wondering, like what our first conversation was like. This was literally a question that he
Yeah.
asked me the first time we met each other. and I think my answer is pretty consistent to what it was back then, which is like, I don't know if there's anyone in my life that really actually like, maybe I know at I'll use that person that I shared like as like I felt like she was just like an angel like plucked out of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
sky. Um I've told her before like how significant that was to me, but I don't think that perhaps she knows that like that's like a lasting thing. Like I'm 9 years removed from like those couple of months that we worked together, and it still impacts me to this day, and like kind of like the opening of my perspective and opening of my like way that I mean, like one of the things that she just like give an example, and you can probably see how it still affects me today is she she had like a pretty strong faith at the time, and she had like a pretty strong faith, and I knew that about her because we got hired together, we like onboarded together, and you just find yourself talking about things like that. And so I knew that about her, but she was also this like big yogi and like could seamlessly talk about like the universe and energy and like all of that stuff. And so I remember there was like one day um we were working at Lululemon, and someone just talked my ear off about like, well, just think about the energy that you're putting out there and be open to receiving the whatever. And I was like, fuck, like, what are you talking about? Like, this is crazy. And so I walked over to her, and I just basically was like, how is it that you say that you have this like really strong faith, but then you can also talk about things like energy and the universe and the whatever? Like, it just doesn't compute for me. And she basically went on to say that like, whether it be yoga or talking about energy or acupuncture or chakras or all of these like weird things that people talk about, all of it is just a tool to get to know your God better. That's all it is. So like she said that to me that quickly and then
Yes.
walked away, and it changed my life. It changed
Yeah.
everything to me. And like I remember at different times in my life where I'm like uh shortly after I broke my leg, my back was really messed up because, like I was just overcompensating one side of my body. It's normal, but my back was super fucked up and I didn't know how to fix it. Nothing I was doing was working. And this body worker approached me in Charlotte and was like, do you want me to like talk to you about your chakras and aligning all this stuff? And I'm like, why the fuck not? Like, whatever. And so
Yeah.
she was like talking to me about like, where's my pain coming from? And it was on like my back, like my spine, but the bottom left side, which has to deal with like the feminine energy in your life, and you need to dissect the feminine relationships, and there's like a push and pull and whatever. And I was like, I don't know if I prescribe to that, but why not look at it? This is just a tool that
Hmm.
like God has given people to like get to know him better and get to know yourself better. I don't need to reject it because I think it's crazy. Like, let me use it. And so now, like, fast forward several years, people talk to me about crazy shit all the time, and I'm like, sure, like I'll sit down and have a conversation with you. Like, it's not a deal breaker. In worst case scenario is I'll walk away learning something about myself. So I would say that was one small example of how just little bits of perspective that she shared with me during that like year. Because after that I moved away to Charlotte, and then we were never in the same area ever again. And I remember later that year, I studied abroad in England for like a couple of months, and she wrote me this like really nice letter that I randomly found a couple weeks ago when I was like digging through a bunch of old stuff, where she just basically talked about like her hopes for me in England of how I would be able to like experience the world around me, and reminding myself to walk around with open palms physically every once in a while. Just open up your palms and receive all that the world is giving you. Loony, right? But like just little statements like that still stick with me. That like, not that anyone's watching me for 24 hours a day, but if you were, you would still catch me on occasion stopping, putting my hands out, and just taking one deep breath and mentally telling myself, received. Just received all that the world is giving me. And that was very, very, very different than how I was raised.
Yeah.
The church would tell me that I'm insane. So she definitely uh, changed a lot of how I perceive the world around me, for sure.
I love that. And I agree 100%. Like, I think that's so important because I think to go back to what we said earlier is I think in sometimes in those church settings or through our religion, we can get very rigid and kind of closed off from like, different thought processes
Yeah,
or receiving to your point, right? And it's funny because I didn't have any particular person help me come to that conclusion, but I noticed that even when I was in that church, like I just questioned everything all the time. I was the questions
sure,
guy. Like okay, I see that, but what about this? What about this? And it's funny because I would just like somehow I got there, right? And it's just funny because like I totally agree 100% that it is like it's a way to discover God. Essentially, I
yeah,
totally agree with that 100%.
for
That's so
sure.
cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, love it. Okay, so next, what is a skill or talent that you'd like to share with the audience here?
skill or talent. I would say like again, it's gonna sound however it sounds, but I genuinely have like a real skill for public speaking. Like I know
Yeah.
that that's like not inherent to everyone, and like some people it's like a really big fear of theirs, but like I kind of thrive off of it. I'm cool with talking to two people or 200 people. It doesn't bother me. And I think through my years of learning and growing and literally studying how to talk to groups of people. I have like a really it's also just like funny talking about something you're good at, which is like I don't know, it just sounds funny, but like I definitely have an ability to make complex things simple and bite sized and a manner in which that I'm not overwhelming people, but I can still be thorough. As people can tell on this when they're listening to, I'm long winded with things, but when I need to like talk to a group and I need to like get a point across, I can be very succinct without being sharp or without being like, whoa, back up. It's like I don't know, just whenever I am tasked to talk to a group of people, just things get really clear for me and I'm able to do that. And so in different areas of my life or in different times of my life, that's come in handy. And at another time of my life, it will come in handy as well. And I can also do it on like zero notice. If someone's like, hey, you just need to go like say something, I'm like, all right, sounds good. And I just find my way through it. Yeah, I would say like that is a skill. And it's also fun because you just find yourself in weird situations when, again, you're just open to what the
Yeah,
world throws your way, and you're like, okay, sure,
I love that. That's funny. I feel very similar, actually, which
yeah,
is really funny. So I'm not
hmm
surprised. I mean, I'm sure. I mean, we're on this podcast together. We're having some good conversations,
yeah,
but
yeah,
um, yeah. But I don't know if I've always been that way, but I have always been like the entertainer type, I guess I could say. Like even as a kid, I was just always like, "Hey, look at me!" And I like
yeah,
being, just like kind of that person, right? So I think probably what got me real comfortable was doing music. I'd say probably
sure,
got me comfortable because performing in front of lots of people. And do you still get nervous? Yeah, I still get nervous. Like even when I facilitate trainings, but yeah, you wouldn't know it, and it's just
yeah,
because same as you. Like it's fun and. You could have talked to my peers. My peers would be trying to study all their stuff all the time. And it's like, I can go do that real quick. I'll look at the stuff for a second and we'll figure it out, you know?
yeah.
Um,
And I think like I worked for a girl. It's my favorite person I've ever worked for in my entire life. She's still really close to me to this day, but I remember there was a time of working for her where she started challenging me on that. Like she's like, I love the fact that you can go up there and you can just make it happen and you can just talk about it. But what if you were also prepared? Like what if you were prepared
mhm,
and you had that skill set?
exactly.
And that also changed things for me, like in that realm of something that I felt like I was already really naturally good at. Like it taught me how to prepare in a different way. And now what's fun is I find myself in a realm where I facilitate a lot. I facilitate a lot of content, a lot of
Yep.
conversation, and a really great facilitator once told me that like his favorite thing to do is be really, really, really clear on 80% of it. 80% is the sweet spot for him because there's 20% of variance that just happens with groups of people. You can facilitate the same content
Agreed.
with five different groups of people, and that 20% is going to be very different in the five. And you have to be agile enough and like kind of like witty enough to just pivot on a dime and still get the point across. And
Yep.
so I think over the last couple of years of refining that talent, I've gotten to a point where like I'm okay with like that 80% in doing that intentionally, not to be underprepared, but to look for what's just naturally being presented back to me. because that's where you can really shine whenever you can acknowledge exactly what's happening in a room, because you're not just so like laser focused on like getting through your notes, you know?
Yeah, I agree. It's funny, I've never heard that before, but I totally agree. I think
Yeah.
80/20. I think that makes a whole lot of sense.
Hmm.
Because I mean, for the same fact, right? When I would travel and train, the different stores, I'd be delivering sometimes the exact same content to three different stores, but every time it was always slightly different, right? And that's
Yeah.
just because different people, different questions come up. You realize the team needs slightly different adjustments in certain spots versus others, or they need more
Yep.
clarity on certain things. Yeah, so it's fun to have that, like have your plan, but be flexible enough, right? That
Right.
adaptability is important to be able just to flow with the convo and go from there. So I like that.
Totally. Yeah. It's a good one. It's fun.
That is. Okay, so now what are you learning about currently that you'd like to teach us?
Honestly, man, I'm like, what am I learning about? I feel like I'm learning all the time, but I would say that I am learning deconstructing the mental constructs, I suppose, that I like had around like sex from like a
Mhm.
really young age because of the church.
Yeah,
Um so like deconstructing the abstinence movement and like learning about what that means for me now that I'm 29, and people within the church and outside of the church have recognized that that movement was really destructive, but I'm a
yeah,
product of that movement. So I think what I'm learning, there's a really good book that's called Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, that my therapist gave me, that I've been like reading through, in the last couple of weeks that I was on medical leave, not working, so I had the time to do it. And just like talking about like the fallacy that like I remember growing up and like there was just a lot of shame surrounding sex. Like it was like this bad,
yeah,
dirty thing, and it was really not good. And it caused me to look at it a specific way, and it caused me to look at myself a specific way. And um, it like stuck with me for a really long time, to where it's like, if you do these things, you are bad. And it's like, yo, like, guess who didn't say that? God, like, so like, but it's funny, like after like
yeah,
years of going through that like conditioning almost in the church, and growing up, and like I said earlier, I was like part of this ministry that like facilitated that teaching, like I was part of that movement from a teaching lens, not just a living it out lens. And so it's been like this like really active like learning thing for me of like, what does this mean for like, where can I be gracious with myself looking back on my past in times that I probably was extremely hard on myself, in times that I felt like a failure and like a sinner, to use the word, and like I was so hard on myself that I was like, man, if I knew then what I know now, I would have just approached it so differently. And so I feel like I'm just learning a lot about that, and like where that can still like rear its head, and what does that mean, like, this is like all in the context of like Paige and I, my fiance Paige and I, are getting married in February, so in a couple months now, and like we're starting marriage counseling, like premarital counseling, to like rev
yeah,
up to that, and like where does this show up in like my own beliefs about my relationship? Where does this show up about all of that stuff? And so now that I'm seeing life in like a little bit of a different arena as like an engaged person, I just feel like I gotta learn this shit, So like it's just something
yeah.
that I feel like I'm like working through right now, and learning about. And at some point I'll have like much more firm, concrete thoughts and opinions about it. Right now I would say I'm still kind of like, you asked the question earlier of like if I'm grieving my injury, basically. I would say that I'm in the
Yeah.
grieving process now of like all of the shit that I learned growing up, of like, yo, that was like actually traumatic. And I don't really love using that word, but like, if you just look up what is trauma and what is traumatic, like if there's just a checklist of trauma, that whole like learning and like the constant berating of like all of that stuff, it just created a lot of trauma in my life. And so I'm just learning how to like forgive myself for things, and how to like move past it in a way that, like, I mentioned earlier that yoga and the universe and chakras or whatever, like a way for you to experience God. And like God created sex, God created pleasure as a
Yeah.
way of like experiencing the world around you, and especially in your relationships and all of that stuff. And I feel like that aspect of like pleasure has been something that's been like locked away for like a long time,
Yeah.
of like, how do I fully receive that gift that he created in a way that doesn't fuck me up mentally? So like that's what I would say like I'm learning and like going through now. And it's a really odd thing to learn, because I feel like some of these other things that I've learned in my life, I'm like, oh, okay, well, now that I know it, I can like act differently. And I feel like this is one, and I think it's because it's like one of the things that I was taught for the longest in my life. It's just taken a really long time for me to like work through it, you know? So, um, yeah, that's how I would answer that question of what I'm learning right now. Can't teach it, by the way. I'm not on that step yet, but one day I will be, and it'll be interesting to teach.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's crazy funny. I Same thing. It's funny listening. So we've had talks before, but
Yeah.
it's mind blowing to me how many things you're saying that I'm like, yeah, like I
Yeah,
get
for
that.
sure. Yeah.
So, and because I mean, I was part of the same movement, right? So when you think about that, like I think too is like I don't think people talk about sex enough. Like think about it, like it's always this taboo topic. It's always this
No,
thing. Like I don't think I had any discussions with anybody about sex like at all, besides like hearing people talk about it at school or just
for
random
sure.
stuff. But like it was just interesting, and I think like I don't know. I wish, and I think maybe it's coming around, but I think it's important that we are educated or we know stuff like that. And yeah,
Yeah.
because otherwise, yeah, we would feel a bunch of shame around it. We have no one to turn to because it feels like, well, nobody's talking about it, so I don't feel like I can talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it just
Well, then
creates
like
like,
you also
yeah,
get like shamed to talk
yeah,
about it, right? So
exactly, yeah.
like it's going to get to a weird portion of the podcast, but we're here. We're talking about it
Why
anyway.
not?
So like uh set a scene for you. You're 13 years old. You're like, you know, you have a laptop, a phone, an iPad, whatever. You're in your room googling shit on the internet because you're naturally at 13 curious.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's what you do. Your parents catch you looking at porn on the internet. Most of the time parents go, don't do that, that's bad, make that's bad, don't do that, that's icky, that's bad. So what does that teach that 13-year-old? That this stuff that you're naturally wired for, by the way, is
Yeah,
bad and
agreed.
wrong, and therefore I have to hide it. So if I want to indulge in this very natural thing, I have to hide it. And then hiding, as we know as human beings, when you hide things, it just is never good. Things eventually come out into light, and there's no wonder why people have such strong like addictions toward like pornography or things like
Yeah,
that, because they have to hide these things in their lives. So this book, I cannot recommend it higher. It's fantastic, but basically like she at one chapter is basically all about like the talk, you know, like how parents should have the talk.
yeah, yeah,
And what she offers is like that same exact situation. The parents catch the kid doing the thing, right? So like you catch the kid, you back out of the room, let them do their thing, and then you go back in and talk with them and be like, "Hey, I see that this is what's going on. Just so you know, supernatural. That is like very natural for like kids your age. I remember when I was 13, like whatever. Just so you know, if you ever have any questions about the way that you're feeling or what's normal and what's not, just come and ask me." That is such a different way than like how people handle it. So
yep,
what she goes on to suggest is like the talk is not the talk. It's 101-minute talks along the way of like, this is what your body does, and this is what sexuality is, and this is like, this is what pleasure is, in the same way of like, did you like the way that that strawberry tasted? Like same way of getting to like understand your body and things like that. So like that was not my upbringing. That was not how things happened in my life.
yep,
And then again, being that like spiritual crusader in the city of St. Louis, there's just a lot of trauma attached to it. And so I think that part of that grieving is like, man, how much time was lost holding myself so rigid and so high strung on something that I was so convinced was the way to do it. And like, yeah, even again, as like a mental construct, just as a theory, people are like, this is bad, this is don't do it. It's bad. It's bad. It's bad. It's bad. But when you put your ring on your finger, you're going to have amazing sex and it's going to be awesome.
It doesn't work
That's
like
not
that.
how that works, bro. Because like you get told for years and
Oh
years, however many years it is, that it's wrong, it's bad, you should be ashamed of yourself, all this stuff, and then all of a sudden you just like say something in front of like a watching party, you sign a marriage certificate, and now all of a sudden those years of being told that something is wrong is now right. Doesn't work that way. So like I don't know. I think I'm just like, yeah, I just try to be gracious with myself that like I'm still learning that, and it's okay that I'm still learning that. Um, and I'll probably be learning it for a long time. And one day, it'd be sick to just like, be in a different space than I am now, and I'll get there. But I would say that is what I'm learning at the current moment.
yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And you said it was called Sex, God, and
The
Conservatism
conservative church.
in the Conservative Church.
Yeah.
And it's funny because you said sex is like a big part of life, and it's funny. We'll talk about this another day. I'll sideline this for later. But
Sure.
there's this evolutionary psychologist named David Buss that goes through the human mating strategy, and at the core of it, he talks about how that kind of is potentially on a biological level the thing,
Yeah.
right, that
Totally.
motivates all of us. Like that, like
Totally.
most of our decisions and everything, whether we think we're at this high level or not, a lot of times it's in the root of just sex, essentially. And it's a really interesting topic, but I'll save that for another day. But that'll be a good conversation.
Yeah, a way less philosophical version of that is if you're a fan of The Office in like season 8 or season 9, Robert California goes on the same spiel to the whole office. So like,
Yeah.
if you want to listen to like the philosophical thing, talk to Ricky. If you just want like a quick money grab, watch The Office. Like
That was,
Robert California, that's what it
dude,
is.
dude, you're so right. You're so right.
Yeah, literally.
I love it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So let's see. So we've talked about a lot today. So we've talked about, your childhood. We talked about some of the struggles you're going through. We talked about some stuff that you're doing for fun, etc. So if you had a book of your life so far, what would the name of the book be called?
We call it moments. Um,
Okay.
I it kind of goes back to the whole like walking around like receiving like everything that like God and the universe is presenting to you and all that stuff. I think that life is made up of a bunch of like little tiny moments, and um it's also so funny. I was a sophomore, junior in college, something like that. I saw this girl post something on Instagram one time, and she on the picture that she posted on Instagram, she put like a line, the date, and then the line. So it's just like just what it was. Like it's nothing special. But I like fell in love with the idea of the fact that those two lines were like bookends of things. And like I started, like if you go on my Instagram now, you can see that since 2015, I've like dated every picture that is on my Instagram. It's like there, like the lines. And I love the idea that, and I always put the date that the picture was taken, not the date that I posted it, because like I love the idea that no matter what happens in life, I can like look at this moment, and that's what the moment was.
Yeah.
And as I got older, I thought about the moment and how you make these two lines, right? Like, so you got these two lines, and there's like three spaces that come from the two lines. The first one is like on the left of the space, which is like, the past, right?
Yeah.
Like, you think about the past all the time. The past informs the present. The past informs the future. Like it's really important to look backwards and learn from the past and the things you liked and you didn't like. And it's so important to be in touch with the past. But in some weird way, the past doesn't really exist. You can't touch it. You can't
Yeah.
change it. It's just there. And then like skipping over the middle zone, it's like the space to the right of the two lines, which is the future. And equally so, same, but different for the future doesn't exist. It stresses people out. It's the cause of inspiration, and it's the cause of, the root of anxiety as well, worrying about the future and thinking about what's going to happen. And similar how the past isn't really real, the future isn't really real either. And all we have is the space that's here and the space that's now. And at like during that time of trying to like figure myself out, I just really focused on what was between the two lines. A question that comes from that is, what are you learning right now? Not what have you learned and what do you hope to learn, but what are you learning right now? That is a question that you asked me, but it's very much in my normal arsenal of asking questions because I think I can learn a lot from a lot of people. But I look back to, and we've talked about a couple of them, in this conversation, but there's a lot of moments that have really changed the course of my life. And if I were to call it anything, it'd be moments. And fact of the matter is, you just like put those two lines on a t-shirt, looks cool, like you don't even know what it means, but like the book cover would literally have those two lines, moments in the middle, moments
Yeah,
period with the middle, like, yeah, like, but those two lines are really significant to me, and that's what that means.
I like that. Are you making a t-shirt line?
I don't think so. I don't think
Oh,
that'll be what I do, but you will notice,
yeah.
like, there are times that I will literally add those two lines into things. Just I'll write a work email and I'll throw the two lines in different places, and people, especially people at Nike, I've never had this conversation with people at Nike. They don't know what that means, and even some Lululemon people that I worked with forever don't know what that means. But like, there are people in my life that when they see those two lines, they know that that's significant of that to me. And it's like, again, a reminder of like when I'm talking to people, it's like, what are you learning in this moment? That's like big, but it's also a reminder of myself of like, don't let the moment pass. What are you learning presently? Like every moment is an
Uh-huh.
opportunity to like learn something and take it, cherish something and whatever it is. So like every time I see those two lines, it's a reminder for myself too. I'm a pretty like self-reflective person. Like I'm in that work all the time, the work. I'm in that work all the time, and moments was at the core of all of it.
I love that. And it also
Yeah,
reminds me of how you talked about being open to receiving, right?
always.
You got to be present.
Always have to be. And when you're not being,
Yeah,
and I think like the older I've gotten, I think that that is like the most self-talk that I have to myself, which is just like slow down, take a breath and be present. Like, it's also fun fact, the key to being a really good public speaker is like, you're going to be nervous, use the nervousness, take a deep breath and just feel the moment. Like, how cool
great.
is it the fact that you get the opportunity to talk in front of 200 people, and like, you might spit, you might like stutter, who gives a fuck? Call it out. Be
Yeah,
like, wow, I just fumbled over my words there. That's
exactly.
crazy.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
just move on. Like, so I think, yeah, being present in it, I just like the symbol of like moments in those three spaces, and they're all really important spaces.
Totally agree with that. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so now this is the part of the podcast where you get to talk about yourself. So get to share
Yeah.
what are you doing right now? Where can people find you? I know you have another podcast that might be something to
Yeah.
talk about. I mean, so the
Yeah.
floor is yours for however long you want.
Hilarious. People like from Nike that listen to this, they're going to learn that I have another podcast. I've never talked to anyone at Nike about having a podcast, but they're going to learn. Where can people find me? I work at Nike. You can find me in St. Louis, doing Nike things. I am getting my master's starting this fall. So like I'm getting my master's in counseling. So I'll be a student of Missouri Baptist University. I'll be there. If you're a student, like, I guess we'll be class. I'm doing virtual classes, so I probably won't ever talk to you, but whatever. I also, yeah, I have a podcast with my friends. It's called the Mecca of Banter. It's a soccer related podcast. If you are not a soccer fan, you will not enjoy the podcast. We're not interesting enough to like have fans that aren't interested in what we're talking about. So like, there's that. That's where people can find me. If you want to find me on socials, all of my socials are the same. It's just at Henry Wynd. It's my first and last name. It's always been that way. It probably will always be that way. Um, but yeah, that's where you can find me. And then physically, like if you're in the city of St. Louis, you can find me at a coffee shop in the mornings, and you can find me at like a cocktail bar at night. Like I love getting groups of people together around a liquid, whether it's coffee, a juice, a cocktail. I don't really care. I think a liquid is such a good uh centerpiece of a conversation. So that's where people can find me if you're interested. And then I'm always down for conversation. So if like anything that you heard is interesting in this that you want to hear more about, like whether we've talked before or not, I don't really care. Like I'm always down to have good conversations, and I think that it's at the core of how we learn, and how we learn from one another is conversation. So um even if I pissed you off during this podcast, if I said something that made you mad, like that's fine too. And you'll have a really gracious recipient in having that conversation. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
Sweet. Love that. And then this is the last thing. So what I like to do, which got a little thunder going on
Whoa,
here.
we're
I don't know
doing
if
it
you can hear it.
live. Oh yeah, we got a little
Woo!
thunder,
Okay.
rumbling
Okay.
thunder in Kansas City. Here we
Yeah, they're
go.
getting ready for this. Okay. So what's going to happen is I have each guest basically answer a question from the previous guest, but also
Love it.
create the next question for someone else.
Yeah.
So the last guest, this was a question they gave, so I'll have you answer that, and then you get to create your own question for the next guest. So from the last guest, so his question was, what drives or motivates you?
It's an interesting question because I think like in different times of my life, I'd be like at different times of my life, I'd be like really quick to give you an answer of some sort,
Yeah.
whether it was genuine or not. When I like legitimately think about like what wakes me up in the morning and how I spend my time, because again, what drives you is like where you spend your time. To boil it down to one word would be connection. Um, like fuck, man. If you want me to go to the gym at 6 a.m., I'm like, fuck that. No, I'm not doing that. But if you're like, hey, I want to talk, can we get coffee at 6 a.m.? I'd be like, absolutely. I'll be there every day, twice on Sunday, like for sure. Um, but I also like, even from like an inspiration standpoint, like I get really inspired and I can like see the potential of what happens through connection, whether it's like a new business idea or like someone just learning more about themselves or developing into a better version of themselves. I just think, dude, this is so
Dude,
funny. People
hardcore.
pay top notch dollar for sound effects in podcasts, and you're just getting
Dude,
natural sound effects.
natural, natural.
I don't know. I get really inspired by connections and like, my fiance and I like always laugh about this. Like we interpret information differently. So like if I asked you the question of like, how big is a soccer field? Or like, this is probably a better one. I want to figure out how to scale my business. If that's the question, right? Like I would like to go to like business professionals that scale their business, build their relationship, learn what I can from them. Paige would like to Google it, read a book, like take in scholarly articles, which again, neither one is right and neither one is wrong. It's just the difference in how we look at information. But for me, connection goes back to the core of it. I get inspired by like, what did that person do? What did they build? How can like I take my skill set to help like build with them? And so yeah, connections at the very heart of it. So that's what I would say is like what motivates me and inspires me. It's what I get out of bed for in the morning. And also the absence of connection, I feel that immensely. Like if I go through a period of time where I'm like, I just don't feel connected to this person or that thing or whatever, it's just not, it's never going to last.
Yeah, it's funny. I agree. So I answered this question for fun when he brought it up on the last podcast. Is mine was connection. I think creativity. It was like two-sided, right? The
Yeah.
creativity of like being able to create something that doesn't exist, essentially, like bring something. This is awesome.
That's
Everybody's
crazy.
freaking out. There's
I'm sure
lightning.
they are.
Lights are flickering. This is so good.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah. So creativity, bringing something to the world that isn't there. And I think the cool thing about creativity is you have to be present and in the moment to be creative, right?
Yeah. Totally.
You can't be in the future, you can't be in the past when you're creating stuff. Like you have to be there in the moment. And then the connection piece of like, just like I love connecting with people, man. Like having conversation, talking, getting to know people. I don't think I would like if I wanted to learn about a business, go to that person and talk to them. I would probably do what your
Yeah.
fiance's doing and
Yeah.
read and learn a book. But it's something about
Totally.
connection, like that just makes everything better. And like I don't know, I just love it. So I totally agree with that.
Yeah. It's like, it's funny. Like it goes back to like when you ask the question about like a skill set or like a talent, I said public speaking because like I think that's like a talent, but something that like I also feel is like really innate and like natural into who I am is like I can like intuitively feel my way through a conversation really naturally. So
Yep.
like for example, if I went into a conversation with that business professional to like learn everything that I need to learn, maybe it goes back to that like 80-20 mentality of like being 80% prepared, 20% whatever. But like when that 20% of gray comes in, I feel like I can lean into that so heavily
Yeah.
and learn so much more than I would even know how to Google, if that makes sense.
I
Like,
yeah, agree.
so yeah, when that comes into like, I think if you were to like spend time with me over the course of a week, like you would watch how I just like treat different people. Um, there's a reason why like when I go places, like I know the barista's name, like I know like the security guards at my mall, like stuff like that. Like I just think that I um just like intuitively build those connections, and it's just so innate to who I am.
I love that.
Yeah.
Cool. So now, what question do you want to leave the next guest?
Yeah. Um, Fun is literally a core value of mine. I look to like inject fun into just about everything that I do. I'm really conscientious of where fun exists in my life. So my question is, when was the last time, and tell me about it, when was the last time you just had a ton of fun? Like, when was the last time you really had fun? Not like you just got drinks with your friends and like it was cool and I had a good time. When was the last time you had like real fun?
Okay, I love that. Okay, perfect. Can't wait for that person to answer that question. I'm
It's a good
stoked.
one. Yeah. Yeah.
Sweet. So, anything else before we close out? Anything else you
Nah,
want to talk
bro.
about?
I feel good. It's funny, like going through these things and going through the questions, like I didn't know what was going to come out of my mouth in this, and like I thought about the questions, and I just all of the all of the things that came out today were just like very on the nose with like just where I am today. If we would have talked about this 3 days ago, we might have gotten different answers, and we could have the same exact conversation 3 months from now, and it'd probably be
Yeah,
different. It's just like again, it goes back to those moments of like you just caught me exactly where I am today, and appreciate it.
great. Yeah, and I'm glad. Thank you for hopping on and doing it. It's funny. Like I knew what day two for you when we first met, when we started having deep conversations. Like, yeah, when I get that podcast going, Henry's going to be on it for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Here we go. We made it. We made
so here
it.
we go.
Yeah.
Perfect. So appreciate it. So thank you. And yeah, I'm sure we'll do it again. We'll have some
Let's do
fun
it.
topics in the future. Maybe we could have some real, because I know you said you liked theology and stuff like that. So
Sure.
maybe we just put on like a fun little theology podcast. We just talk theology for fun,
Just
or
literally like have to preface everything with like we are not professionals. We
just
don't know everything. So like
yeah,
disclaimer, disclaimer, disclaimer,
yeah,
disclaimer.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just have an episode dedicated to some really fun topics. So we should totally do
Literally.
that.
Yeah. For sure. For sure.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Henry, and
Of
I'm
course.
sure we'll do this again.
Sounds good, brother. Thank you so much.
Cool, man. I'll see you later.